Henry Jacobs wiped the sweat from his brow as he fumbled with the last bolt of his makeshift time machine. The contraption, a haphazard assembly of gears, wires, and blinking lights, stood precariously in the middle of Mabel's Diner, a popular 1940s hotspot known for its jukebox and endless coffee refills. Henry glanced around nervously. The diner was packed with patrons dressed in vintage attire, oblivious to the temporal anomaly brewing in their midst. With a final twist, the machine whirred to life, emitting sparks and a low hum that quickly escalated into a deafening roar. Henry braced himself, gripping the side of the machine as the air around him shimmered and distorted. A blinding flash engulfed the diner, and for a moment, everything was silent. When the light faded, Henry staggered out of the machine, his clothes slightly singed and his hair standing on end. He looked around, disoriented, as the sounds and smells of the diner assaulted his senses. The waitress, a sprightly woman with red hair tied up in a neat bun, approached him with a bemused expression. "Hey there, honey," she said, eyeglasses perched on her nose. "You look like you've seen a ghost. What can I get you?" Henry blinked, trying to process the scene. Coffee. Black. Please." She nodded, jotting down the order. "Coming right up." "You new around here?" Henry forced a smile. "You could say that. Just passing through." As he waited, Henry's mind raced. His mission was clear: prevent the impending World War III that loomed in his original timeline. He had traveled back to this pivotal moment, hoping to alter the course of history. But something felt off. His machine had malfunctioned, landing him in a different time than intended, the 1940s, an era already fraught with its own tensions. The waitress returned with his coffee, placing it carefully in front of him. Henry reached out, accidentally knocking the cup slightly. It wobbled precariously before stabilizing. He chuckled nervously. "Guess I'm a bit unsteady right now." She laughed softly. "Don't worry, sweetheart. It's just a cup of coffee. Or are you here for something else?" Henry sighed, deciding to take a gamble. "Actually, I'm here to prevent a war. World War III. It's very important." The waitress raised an eyebrow, her laughter fading into curiosity. "Prevent a war, huh? That's a tall order. You sure you're not just having a bad day?" Before Henry could respond, a newspaper was slid across the table toward him by an elderly man sipping his coffee. The headline read, "Tensions Rise as Nations Edge Toward Conflict," with a subheading about the looming threat of a global conflict that could spiral into another devastating war. Henry's heart skipped a beat. He glanced at the date, July 15, 1945. This wasn't the future he intended to visit. The war he aimed to prevent was not the World War III he knew, but another significant conflict of the time. His previous attempt to prevent World War II had inadvertently led to an even more catastrophic global situation. A waitress nearby overheard the exchange and leaned in, a smirk playing on her lips. "Looks like you're not just any ordinary traveler, huh? Maybe you should stick around and enjoy some pie instead of trying to change the world." Henry couldn't help but laugh, the tension easing slightly. "Maybe you're right. A pie wouldn't hurt." As he took a sip of his coffee, his mind churned. Every attempt to alter history had only led to worse outcomes. He had hoped to create a peaceful future, but each intervention seemed to ripple through time, causing unforeseen disasters. This new timeline hinted at a cycle of fate that he couldn't break. Determined to understand the pattern, Henry decided to gather more information. He struck up conversations with the diner's patrons, using humor and charm to mask his true intentions. Each story he heard painted a picture of a world teetering on the brink, with alliances shifting and tensions mounting. One elderly gentleman shared tales of secret negotiations between countries, while a young woman talked about the technological advancements racing ahead, driven by the fear of impending conflict. Henry listened intently, piecing together the complex web of events that could lead to another global war. As the day progressed, Henry realized that his presence in this timeline might be more significant than he initially thought. Perhaps the act of trying to prevent the war was itself a catalyst for the disasters he had witnessed before. The more he meddled, the deeper he seemed to entangle himself in the fabric of history. Later that evening, as the diner began to empty, Henry found a quiet corner to reflect. He pulled out a small notebook, jotting down observations and theories. His initial plan had been to make precise changes, but the unpredictability of each alteration suggested a deeper, perhaps unchangeable, thread running through time. Henry pondered the concept of destiny. Was history truly set in stone, or was there room for intervention? His previous successes had only led to worse outcomes, hinting at a force beyond his control, a cycle of fate that resisted his attempts to rewrite it. As he delved deeper into his thoughts, a familiar figure approached, Dr. Catherine Everhart, a renowned physicist and his colleague in the field of temporal studies. She had been instrumental in developing the time machine, and her expertise was unparalleled. "Henry, there you are," Catherine said, her tone a mix of concern and curiosity. "I was getting worried when you didn't return as scheduled. What happened?" Henry hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "The machine, it malfunctioned. I ended up in a different time than intended." Catherine's eyes sparkled with intrigue. "Different time? Do you mean a different year, or something more significant?" Henry sighed, deciding to be honest. "I was trying to prevent World War III, but it seems I landed in the 1940s instead. Every time I try to change a major event, the future only gets worse." Catherine frowned thoughtfully. "That sounds like the temporal paradoxes we've theorized about. Every action you take to alter the past could have unforeseen consequences. It's a delicate balance." Henry nodded, feeling the weight of his predicament. "Exactly. I thought I could create a better future, but instead, I'm stuck in a cycle of failure. Maybe some events are meant to happen." Catherine sat down beside him, her expression sympathetic. "It's possible. Time is incredibly complex, and our understanding is still limited. But there might be a way to break the cycle, or at least minimize the damage." Henry looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. "How? What can we do?" Catherine leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We need to understand the underlying patterns of these temporal shifts. There might be an inherent logic to the chaos, a reason why certain events are resistant to change. If we can decipher that, we might find a way to guide history without causing more harm." Henry felt a surge of determination. "You're right. Maybe instead of trying to prevent specific events, I need to influence them more subtly, ensuring that the natural course of history is maintained while steering it toward peace." Catherine smiled. "It's a long shot, but it's worth exploring. Let's start by analyzing the changes you've already made. Perhaps we can identify a pattern or a rule that governs these temporal responses." Over the next few days, Henry and Catherine worked tirelessly, poring over historical records and Henry's notes. They mapped out each of his interventions and the subsequent disasters that followed. The patterns were perplexing. Each attempt to prevent a war led to a different kind of catastrophe, each seemingly more severe than the last. One evening, as they reviewed the data, Catherine pointed to a recurring motif. "Look at this. Every major change you make creates a ripple effect, but there's a common thread. It's like time has a way of preserving its integrity, ensuring that certain key events still occur, even if they're altered." Henry frowned, considering her words. "So, no matter what I do, time adjusts itself to maintain a certain trajectory?" "Exactly," Catherine replied. "It's as if there's an underlying structure to history that can't be easily disrupted. Your interventions are attempts to force change, but time responds by compensating in ways that keep the overall flow intact, or even push it toward greater extremes." Henry leaned back, the reality of his situation sinking in. "So, trying to change history is like trying to push a river upstream. It's not going to work, and it might even cause more damage." Catherine nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps the only way to truly influence the future is not by altering specific events, but by understanding and working within the existing framework. Maybe instead of preventing wars, you can find ways to reduce their impact or help society recover more quickly. Henry sighed, feeling the weight of his failures but also the spark of a new approach. It's a different kind of mission than I imagined, but maybe it's the only viable path. As the days turned into weeks, Henry adjusted his methods. Instead of making drastic changes, he focused on subtle interventions, planting ideas, fostering alliances, and encouraging technological advancements that could mitigate the effects of conflict. Each small action required patience and a deep understanding of the historical context. One chilly autumn evening, Henry found himself back in Mabel's diner, the place where his journey had taken an unexpected turn. The diner was quieter now, the earlier hustle replaced by a serene stillness. He sat at his usual corner table, sipping his coffee and reflecting on his progress. Catherine joined him, a stack of papers in hand. "I think we're onto something," she said, placing the documents on the table. "Your recent interventions have had a noticeable impact. The financial crisis seems less severe, and there are early signs of international cooperation that weren't there before." Henry felt a surge of hope. "That's incredible. Maybe we really can make a difference without causing more harm." Catherine smiled. "It's a start. But we need to remain cautious. Time is still unpredictable, and we don't fully understand all the variables at play." Henry nodded, appreciating her wisdom. "Agreed. We need to keep monitoring the changes and adjust our strategies accordingly." As they continued their work, Henry began to see the delicate dance between fate and free will. While he couldn't control every aspect of history, his actions could nudge it in a more positive direction. It was a slow, painstaking process, but it offered a glimmer of possibility in the otherwise bleak cycle he had been trapped in. One night, as Henry walked home through the quiet streets, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was part of something much larger than himself. The weight of his responsibility pressed heavily on him, but so did the hope that he could make a meaningful difference. As he reached his modest apartment, Henry paused to gaze out the window at the city skyline. The lights twinkled like stars, each one representing countless lives and stories intertwining across time. He realized that his journey wasn't just about preventing disasters, it was about understanding the intricate tapestry of human history and finding his place within it. Inside, he sat down at his desk, pulling out his notebook. He began to write, documenting his experiences and insights, hoping that one day, someone else might continue the work he had started. As he penned the final lines of the day, a sense of peace settled over him. The cycle of fate was complex and unyielding, but within its endless loops, there was room for hope, change, and perhaps even redemption. Henry leaned back, the fatigue of weeks spent navigating the intricate dance of time weighing heavily on him. The city outside his window was a blend of old and new, much like the history he was trying so desperately to influence. The streetlights cast long shadows, and the distant hum of traffic served as a constant reminder of the world moving forward. Regardless of his efforts, Catherine entered the room quietly, her presence a comforting constant amidst the chaos of their mission. She placed a stack of papers on the desk, her eyes gleaming with a mix of excitement and concern. "I've been going through the latest reports," she began, her voice steady. "The financial crisis is stabilizing, and there are genuine signs of international cooperation. But there are anomalies we didn't anticipate." Henry frowned, scanning the documents. "What kind of anomalies?" "There's a pattern emerging," Catherine explained, pointing to a series of interconnected events. "Every time you make a subtle intervention, it creates a butterfly effect, but there's a threshold beyond which the changes either stabilize or spiral out of control. It's like there's a balancing force at play, ensuring that history remains on a certain path." Henry rubbed his temples, the weight of their discoveries pressing down on him. "So, we're not just nudging history, we're trying to navigate a complex system with its own rules." Catherine nodded. "Exactly. It's a delicate balance. We need to understand the parameters of this system if we're going to make any meaningful impact without triggering another disaster." They spent the next several days delving deeper into their research, analyzing every intervention Henry had made and the subsequent changes that followed. It became clear that their actions were not isolated. Each intervention resonated through the fabric of time, creating ripples that could either harmonize with or disrupt the existing flow of history. One evening, as the sun set and cast a golden hue across the city, Henry and Catherine decided to take a break from their work. They walked through a nearby park, the crisp autumn air filled with the scent of fallen leaves and the distant sounds of laughter from children playing. "Do you ever wonder if we're just pawns in a larger game?" Henry mused, watching a group of teenagers tossing a frisbee. "Maybe our attempts to change history are part of the natural progression, something that needs to happen no matter what." Catherine considered his words thoughtfully. "It's possible. Our understanding of time and causality is still limited. Perhaps there are forces beyond our comprehension guiding these events, ensuring that certain outcomes are inevitable." Henry sighed, a mixture of frustration and resignation evident in his expression. "I came here with the hope of making a difference, but sometimes it feels like we're just adding to the chaos instead of reducing it." Catherine placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "I believe our intentions matter. Even if we can't control every outcome, our efforts to guide history toward a better future are still meaningful. We just need to be more strategic in how we approach our interventions." They returned to their apartment, their minds buzzing with new ideas and strategies. Henry began to outline a more calculated plan, focusing on specific events where subtle changes could have a positive impact without triggering massive disruptions. They identified key moments in history where small actions could lead to significant improvements, such as fostering early scientific collaborations or promoting diplomatic dialogues. One such intervention involved Henry traveling to the 1950s to encourage the formation of international scientific committees aimed at preventing the misuse of emerging technologies. By fostering a culture of collaboration and ethical responsibility, they hoped to mitigate the potential for future conflicts driven by technological advancements. As Henry prepared for his next journey, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He and Catherine had moved beyond mere prevention. They were now actively shaping a more resilient and cooperative future. The challenges were immense, but the possibility of creating lasting positive change fueled his determination. The next time Henry activated the time machine, the process felt smoother, more controlled. The familiar surge of energy enveloped him, and the world around him blurred into a kaleidoscope of colors and sounds. When the disorientation subsided, he found himself in a bustling European city during the early 1950s. The air was thick with the promise of post-war reconstruction, and the optimism of a new era was palpable. Henry navigated the streets carefully, blending in with the locals as he sought out key figures involved in scientific and diplomatic circles. His mission was clear: to foster international cooperation that would lay the groundwork for preventing future technological catastrophes and conflicts. He attended meetings, engaged in discussions, and subtly influenced conversations to promote transparency and collaboration. His actions were calculated, designed to encourage unity without drawing attention to his true purpose. Over time, Henry began to see the fruits of his labor. Scientific breakthroughs were shared more freely, and diplomatic channels opened wider, fostering a sense of global community that had been lacking in previous decades. Returning to the present, Henry and Catherine reviewed the changes. The financial crisis had indeed stabilized further, and there were tangible signs of increased international cooperation. The world seemed to be moving toward a more harmonious future, but Henry couldn't shake the feeling that their interventions were only scratching the surface of a much larger puzzle. One night, as Henry pored over historical records, Catherine approached him with a look of concern. "Henry, I've been analyzing the long-term effects of our interventions, and there's something we need to consider." Henry looked up, his curiosity piqued. "What is it?" Catherine hesitated before continuing. "The concept of the historical singularity we discussed, it's more complex than we initially thought. It's not just about maintaining a balance, it's about understanding the thresholds and tipping points that define the trajectory of history." Henry leaned forward, intrigued. "Are you saying that our interventions could push the timeline past a critical point, leading to unpredictable outcomes? Catherine nodded. Exactly. We need to identify these critical junctures and approach them with extreme caution. Some events are more fragile than others, and our actions could have amplified effects that we can't foresee. The weight of her words settled over Henry. They were not just time travelers, they were navigating a labyrinth where each step could lead to salvation or destruction. The responsibility was immense, and the margin for error was virtually non-existent. Determined to proceed with caution, Henry and Catherine devised a new framework for their interventions. They would prioritize events based on their impact and stability, ensuring that each action was measured and carefully considered. They established protocols to evaluate the potential consequences of their interventions, aiming to minimize unintended side effects. Their work took on a new intensity as they delved deeper into the mechanics of time and causality. They collaborated with other experts, seeking insights from historians, physicists, and philosophers to better understand the intricate web of cause and effect that governed history. Each discovery added another layer to their understanding, revealing the delicate balance that held the fabric of time together. One pivotal moment came when Henry decided to travel to the late 1960s, a time of significant social and political upheaval. The civil rights movement, the Cold War tensions, and the rapid advancements in technology made it a critical period where subtle guidance could have far-reaching implications. Henry's mission was to support grassroots movements that promoted equality and justice, hoping to create a more inclusive and stable society. He attended rallies, offered support to key leaders, and used his knowledge of future events to inspire and motivate those around him. His efforts were subtle but impactful, fostering a sense of unity and purpose that transcended the immediate challenges of the time. Upon returning, Henry and Catherine reviewed the changes. The civil rights movement had gained unprecedented momentum, leading to more comprehensive and lasting reforms. The Cold War tensions had eased slightly, with increased dialogue and cooperation between superpowers. The technological advancements were still rapid, but with a stronger emphasis on ethical considerations and global collaboration. These successes bolstered Henry's confidence, reinforcing the idea that their measured interventions could indeed guide history toward a better future. However, they remained vigilant, aware that the balance was fragile and that one misstep could unravel everything they had worked so hard to achieve. As months turned into years, Henry continued his missions, each one more complex and challenging than the last. He became adept at reading the subtle cues of history, anticipating the consequences of his actions with increasing precision. The partnership between him and Catherine grew stronger, their combined expertise creating a formidable force against the chaos of time. One particularly memorable mission took Henry to the early 1980s, a period marked by the rise of personal computing and the dawn of the digital age. Recognizing the potential for both immense progress and significant disruption, Henry focused on fostering responsible innovation. He connected with visionary technologists, encouraging the development of technologies that prioritized ethical considerations and societal benefits. Henry's efforts contributed to the creation of frameworks for technological governance, ensuring that advancements were aligned with the greater good. The digital revolution continued, but with a stronger emphasis on accountability and sustainability, mitigating some of the darker aspects that had plagued the original timeline. Throughout his journeys, Henry grappled with the philosophical implications of his actions. The more he influenced history, the more he realized the intricate interplay between fate and free will. While he could guide events, he couldn't fully control them, and the outcomes were always influenced by a myriad of factors beyond his understanding. One evening, as Henry and Catherine reviewed the latest developments, Catherine brought up a troubling observation. "Henry, there's a pattern we haven't accounted for. Every time we make a significant intervention, there's a latent instability that builds up over time. It's like we're storing up energy that could eventually lead to a major disruption." Henry frowned, contemplating her words. "So, our actions are creating a sort of temporal debt that needs to be repaid? But how?" Catherine shook her head. "I'm not sure. It's as if the timeline resists prolonged alterations, and the more we change, the more it pushes back. We need to find a way to balance our interventions without overloading the system. They delved into their research, seeking answers in the annals of history and the principles of chaos theory. It became clear that their interventions, while beneficial in the short term, were contributing to a buildup of temporal tension that could eventually lead to a catastrophic event. The concept of the historical singularity took on a more ominous tone, suggesting that the timeline could reach a tipping point beyond which it would spiral into chaos. Determined to prevent such a disaster, Henry and Catherine sought out ancient philosophical texts and modern scientific theories, looking for clues on how to stabilize their interventions. They explored concepts of entropy, equilibrium, and the inherent resilience of complex systems, hoping to find a way to harmonize their actions with the natural flow of time. Their breakthrough came when Catherine revisited the idea of subtlety. Perhaps the key to maintaining balance was not in the magnitude of their interventions, but in the frequency and consistency. By spacing out their actions and focusing on long-term sustainability, they could prevent the buildup of temporal tension and allow the timeline to adjust more naturally. Henry experimented with this new approach, carefully planning his missions to ensure that each intervention was spaced out and supported by previous actions. He focused on creating enduring changes that would reinforce each other, building a foundation of stability and resilience within the timeline. One of his most significant missions took him to the late 1990s, a time of rapid globalization and technological interconnectedness. Henry aimed to strengthen international institutions and promote global cooperation, ensuring that the world could better navigate the challenges of an increasingly interconnected future. He worked behind the scenes, supporting initiatives that fostered collaboration and mutual understanding, laying the groundwork for a more unified and cooperative global community. Upon his return, Henry and Catherine observed positive changes in the present. International relations were more stable, with countries working together to address global issues such as climate change and economic inequality. Technological advancements continued, but with a stronger emphasis on ethical standards and sustainable development. These successes reinforced their belief that a measured and strategic approach to intervention could indeed guide history toward a better future without triggering catastrophic disruptions. However, they remained cautious, aware that the delicate balance they were maintaining could be upset by unforeseen factors. As time went on, Henry began to notice subtle shifts in his own perspective. The endless cycle of intervention and adjustment had taken a toll on him, both mentally and emotionally. The burden of shaping history weighed heavily on his conscience, and he found himself questioning the morality of his actions. Was he playing God, deciding the fate of billions? Or was he a necessary force for good, guiding humanity toward a more prosperous and peaceful existence? Catherine sensed his growing unease. One evening, as they sat in their shared workspace, she addressed his concerns. "Henry, I've noticed you've been distant lately. Is something bothering you?" Henry looked up, his eyes weary. "I'm not sure, Catherine. Sometimes I wonder if what we're doing is right. We're making choices that affect millions of lives, and the weight of that responsibility is overwhelming. What if we're not making the right decisions?" Catherine reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder. "It's natural to feel that way. We're dealing with forces beyond our understanding, and the stakes are incredibly high. But think about the positive changes we've achieved. We're preventing disasters, fostering cooperation, and promoting ethical advancements. Our intentions are pure, and our actions have made a difference." Henry sighed, contemplating her words. "I know, but the constant need to intervene, to monitor and adjust, it's exhausting. Sometimes I wonder if there's a point where we should just let history take its course." Catherine nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps there is a balance to be found. We can't control everything, but our efforts can help steer the course in a more favorable direction. It's about finding harmony between intervention and acceptance." Their conversation lingered in Henry's mind as he continued his missions, striving to maintain that delicate balance. He became more attuned to the subtle nuances of history, honing his ability to influence events without overstepping. Each successful intervention brought a sense of accomplishment, tempered by the ever-present awareness of the potential consequences. One pivotal moment came when Henry decided to address the growing threat of environmental degradation in the early 21st century. Recognizing the long-term implications of unchecked industrialization and resource exploitation, he focused on promoting sustainable practices and green technologies. He collaborated with environmental scientists, activists, and policymakers, encouraging the adoption of renewable energy sources and the implementation of conservation initiatives. Upon returning, Henry and Catherine reviewed the changes. The world was making significant strides in combating climate change, with international agreements and grassroots movements driving meaningful progress. The environment was slowly healing, and there was a renewed sense of responsibility toward the planet. These efforts not only improved the present but also laid the foundation for a more sustainable future. Henry felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that his actions were contributing to the well-being of future generations. However, he remained vigilant, aware that the struggle against environmental degradation was ongoing and required continuous effort. As the years passed, Henry and Catherine continued their work, each mission building upon the last. They developed a rhythm, a dance of intervention and observation, learning to navigate the complexities of time with increasing finesse. Their bond grew stronger, united by a shared purpose and the challenges they faced together. One evening, as they sat overlooking the city skyline from their apartment, Catherine turned to Henry with a thoughtful expression. "Have you ever wondered what the ultimate goal is? What we're ultimately trying to achieve?" Henry pondered her question, gazing out at the twinkling lights below. "I think we're striving for a world where humanity can thrive without the need for constant intervention. A society that can navigate its own challenges with wisdom and resilience." Catherine smiled softly. "Exactly. We want to empower people to shape their own destiny, without us having to be the puppet masters pulling the strings. It's about creating the conditions for sustainable progress and harmony." Their conversations often delved into the philosophical, exploring the nature of free will, destiny, and the ethical implications of their actions. They questioned whether they were truly helping or inadvertently perpetuating the cycle of fate they sought to break. These reflections deepened their understanding of their mission, adding layers of complexity to their work. One particularly challenging mission took Henry to the brink of the 21st century, where emerging technologies like artificial intelligence and biotechnology held immense potential but also posed significant risks. Henry aimed to ensure that these advancements were developed responsibly, with a focus on ethical considerations and societal benefits. He engaged with leading scientists and innovators, advocating for the creation of ethical guidelines and oversight mechanisms. By fostering a culture of responsibility and foresight, Henry hoped to prevent the misuse of these powerful technologies and promote their positive applications. Upon his return, Henry and Catherine observed a world where technological advancements were balanced with ethical safeguards. Artificial intelligence was harnessed to address global challenges, and biotechnology was used to improve health and quality of life without infringing on individual rights. The careful regulation and ethical oversight had mitigated many of the risks that had originally plagued the timeline. These successes reinforced their belief in the power of thoughtful, strategic intervention. However, they remained acutely aware of the ever-present potential for unforeseen consequences. The balance they maintained was fragile, and the slightest misstep could unravel everything they had worked so hard to achieve. As Henry continued his missions, he began to contemplate the nature of his existence within this cycle of fate. Was he destined to be forever entwined in this endless loop of intervention and adjustment? Or was there a way to break free from the constraints of the historical singularity, to find a path that allowed history to unfold naturally while still fostering positive change? These questions weighed heavily on him, adding a layer of existential contemplation to his already complex mission. He found solace in his work, but the underlying uncertainty gnawed at him, driving him to seek deeper understanding and answers. One night, as Henry and Catherine reviewed their latest interventions, they stumbled upon a pattern that hinted at a possible way to transcend the cycle they were trapped in. It involved a convergence of key events that, if influenced correctly, could create a self-sustaining equilibrium within the timeline, reducing the need for constant intervention. Excitement and hope surged through them as they explored this new possibility. If they could identify and influence these pivotal moments, they might be able to establish a stable foundation that allowed history to progress more smoothly, minimizing the need for further adjustments and breaking free from the endless cycle of fate. Determined to pursue this lead, Henry and Catherine meticulously planned their next missions, focusing on identifying and influencing these critical junctures. Their efforts were meticulous, each step calculated to ensure that their actions would contribute to the creation of a self-sustaining equilibrium within the timeline. One such mission took Henry to the early 2000s, a time marked by rapid technological innovation and the dawn of the Internet age. He aimed to foster the development of a global information network that promoted transparency, collaboration, and the free exchange of ideas. By creating a foundation for open communication and shared knowledge, Henry hoped to cultivate a culture of cooperation and mutual understanding that would sustain itself without the need for constant intervention. Henry immersed himself in the burgeoning tech scene, collaborating with visionaries and innovators to establish platforms that encouraged global connectivity and the democratization of information. His efforts contributed to the creation of robust digital infrastructures that facilitated the free flow of ideas and fostered a sense of global community. Upon returning, Henry and Catherine observed significant positive changes in the present. The Internet had evolved into a powerful tool for education, collaboration, and social change. Information was freely accessible, and global communication networks had strengthened international bonds, fostering a culture of cooperation and mutual respect. The self-sustaining equilibrium they had envisioned was beginning to take shape, reducing the need for further interventions and providing a stable foundation for the future. These developments marked a turning point in their mission, validating their efforts and offering a glimpse of a future where history could unfold with minimal disruption. However, they remained cautious, aware that the equilibrium was still delicate and required ongoing vigilance to maintain. As Henry and Catherine continued their work, they began to notice subtle shifts in their own lives. The constant strain of their mission was easing, replaced by a growing sense of hope and fulfillment. The balance they had achieved allowed them to step back slightly, trusting in the resilience of the timeline they had helped to shape. One evening, as they sat together in their shared workspace, Catherine turned to Henry with a radiant smile. "Henry, I think we've done it. The equilibrium is holding. The timeline is stable, and the need for constant intervention has diminished." Henry looked at her, a mixture of relief and joy evident in his expression. "It's incredible. We've managed to create a foundation that can sustain itself, allowing history to unfold naturally while still promoting positive change." Catherine reached out, taking his hand in hers. "We did it together. Our combined efforts have made a real difference, and now we can finally take a step back and let history take its course." Henry felt a profound sense of accomplishment, tempered by the bittersweet realization that their mission was coming to an end. The endless cycle of intervention and adjustment was over, replaced by a stable and self-sustaining timeline that allowed humanity to navigate its own challenges with wisdom and resilience. As they reflected on their journey, Henry and Catherine acknowledged the profound lessons they had learned about fate, free will, and the intricate balance that governed the fabric of time. They had come to understand that while history was shaped by countless factors, their efforts had played a crucial role in guiding humanity toward a more harmonious and sustainable future. In the final stages of their mission, Henry prepared for one last journey, a symbolic return to the pivotal moment that had set everything in motion. He wanted to witness firsthand the culmination of their efforts and to ensure that the equilibrium they had established remained intact. As he activated the time machine one last time, Henry felt a sense of peace and closure. The familiar surge of energy enveloped him, and the world around him blurred into a kaleidoscope of colors and sounds. When the disorientation subsided, he found himself standing in the same 1940s diner where his journey had begun. The diner was just as he remembered, bustling with patrons and the comforting aroma of coffee filling the air. Henry took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his mission lift as he embraced the culmination of his efforts. He walked to a quiet corner, observing the scene with a sense of fulfillment and gratitude. In that moment, Henry realized that his journey had not been about controlling or changing history, but about understanding and harmonizing with its natural flow. He had learned to respect the delicate balance that governed the timeline, allowing history to unfold with minimal disruption while still fostering positive change where it was most needed. As he sat in the diner, sipping his coffee and watching the world around him, Henry felt a profound connection to the tapestry of time. He understood that while he had played a role in shaping history, the true essence of humanity lay in its ability to navigate challenges, learn from mistakes, and strive for a better future. With a final glance around the diner, Henry stepped out of the time machine, leaving behind the life he had known. He returned to the present, where he and Catherine stood side by side, watching the world evolve with a newfound sense of hope and stability. The cycle of fate had been navigated, the equilibrium achieved, and the future set on a path of resilience and harmony. Henry felt a deep sense of accomplishment, knowing that his journey had made a meaningful difference in the grand tapestry of history. As the sun set on the horizon, casting a warm glow over the city, Henry and Catherine shared a quiet moment of reflection. Their mission was complete, but the lessons they had learned and the bonds they had forged would remain with them forever. They had embraced the complexities of time, navigated the cycles of fate, and emerged with a profound understanding of their place within the ever-unfolding story of humanity. And so, as the world continued to turn and history marched forward, Henry Jacobs and Dr. Catherine Everhart found peace in knowing that they had played a crucial role in guiding humanity toward a brighter, more harmonious future. The cycle of fate had been respected and balanced, allowing history to flow naturally while still nurturing the seeds of positive change. The end.